who's a co-director at Workers' Dignity and the lead organizer and strategist for the commercial construction campaign. Before Workers' Dignity, she led the public education efforts at Sanctuary in the Streets, a volunteer network offering rapid response services and campaign support for the Pioneer Valley Workers Center, which supports farm and restaurant workers in Western Massachusetts. A year ago, Cecilia was involved in the rapid response mobilization in Mississippi after the ice raids on poultry plants that devastated over 500 families. Cecilia's passion for immigrant and worker rights is fueled from her own experience as a Mexican immigrant, from growing up in a family with roots in the steel labor movement, and from her deep ties to her community. We're glad to have you, Cecilia. Ashley is the interim co-director at Workers' Dignity, where she leads the Music City Writers United campaign and grassroots fundraising work. Ashley is a longtime Workers' Dignity ally and first came to the organization through solidarity roles, including ride shares, donor solicitation, and communication support. Ashley is trained as an academic and worked for 8 years in participatory action research and as a public health instructor. She was radicalized during graduate school when she joined successful community organizing efforts to stop her university from an expansion plan that would displace hundreds of households. She grew up in a small Western Massachusetts town, but considers herself a Southerner after living, working, and learning in the region for more than a decade. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cecilia and Ashley. Thanks again for being here.
And yes, thank you so much. I think, Ashley, do you want to go over the slides?
Yeah, so we've got some slides that we're going to share to help us both show and talk about what we do. And so I'm just going to share my screen. If y'all can let me know that you see it. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yes, we can see it, Ashley.
So Cecilia and I will move through these, and I think we have some slides to introduce ourselves. So if you want to say more, Cecilia, you're up here.
Yeah, I think Molly basically said it all, but yes, my name is Cecilia Prato. I am a co-director at Workers' Dignity, and I am the lead organizer of our construction campaign. I was born and raised in Monclova, Coahuila, Mexico, which is like in the north of Mexico. It is known for, basically having the highest steel production in all Latin America, and also a radical labor movement that goes along with that. And on the left, there is a picture of some of the usual protests that will take place in my hometown, and I think I can see like a couple or more family members that are participating in it. And on the right, it is a picture of the committee at the Pioneer Valley Worker Center. As Molly mentioned, before Workers' Dignity, I was the public education lead of the Sanctuary in the Streets, which is a rapid response and campaign support network for the Pioneer Valley Worker Center, which organizes in the food industry. That picture is from our campaign to support the driver's license bill to make sure that every resident of Massachusetts has the access to public transportation. And our campaign, we focus on an economic pressure strategy, pressuring over 150 businesses and a chamber of commerce and a mayor to support the legislation. And I was also working at Amherst College as a microbiology researcher. I think that's about it.
Great. And so, like Molly said, I've been serving as the interim co-director for about a year now, and I'm from a small town in Massachusetts, but have been in the region here for more than a decade now. And I think what's relevant to share from my background is that I do come from primarily working in a university setting, in academia. I have my formal education in public health, and I've really focused my training on participatory action research and community-based participatory research, and have spent a lot of years thinking about how we use research as a tool for movement building. And so I just selected some photos here to show some examples of my background using that, focused on work in Arkansas, but on our landlord-tenant laws and how substandard housing is a hazard for our health. And through participatory projects, we were able to create tenant unions. On the right side here is a photo from Arkansas Renters United, which is a statewide tenant union that is one of the things that grew out of a years-long research project in which we're training members of community organizations to collect surveys and to disseminate information that is important to them using our sort of position and the privileges that we have as academics. And so I just like to share sort of some of that background and how I come to movement work, both as an ally and as somebody who is formally trained as an academic and a researcher. So the rest of the slides here, before we tell you sort of some of the main campaign areas that we're working on, I just wanted to share a little bit about how we got started. And so Workers' Dignity got started as an all-volunteer organization back in 2010, so more than 10 years ago now. And this is a picture of our very modest first backyard fundraiser 10 years ago. But some of the things that showed the need for a worker center were a fight at a car wash called SureBright Car Wash, where workers were only being paid for the times when actual cars arrived to be washed. So imagine going to work, being scheduled an 8-hour shift, but having to clock out every single time that there was not a customer there to serve. And so people were going to work all day and being paid, $10, $12 at the end when those minutes were totaled up. So that is something that we got that brought us into this work. But then in 2010, the other big thing to mention is the flood. I'm sure many people in Nashville are aware of the flood that happened in 2010. And when we think about what happened to workers there, we know that people, cleanup or response crews were brought in, and some of the companies that came in hired folks, put them to work, and then the companies just disappeared. So people were doing work, their bosses were gone, people weren't getting paid, people weren't being given training and equipment to protect themselves. People are still suffering some of the health consequences from working in really dangerous and hazardous conditions 10 years later now. And I think that's really relevant to share because as we're living in the aftermath of the tornado and of course the coronavirus and thinking about how those are things that are really devastating workers, thinking about how we got started 10 years ago at the heels of sort of this disaster capitalism that we talk about, it's really relevant right now. And so 10 years later, here we are. In the 10 years that we've got started, we have become really a growing worker center. And so I like to also just explain a little bit about what a worker center is. And so a worker center is a community-based organization. We're not a union, so we don't represent workers. We don't bargain on behalf of workers. We represent non-union workers in our communities. And so worker centers typically might play 3 different types of roles. They might provide some services, they might play an advocacy role, or they might be organizing workers. And so we as a worker center play a role in all 3 of those lanes. So for example, we provide ESL classes for some of our members to improve their English language skills. So that's a service we provide. We also do a little bit of advocacy about laws that could be implemented at the city level or the state level that would provide protection for workers and make our workplaces safer. That's advocacy. But at the heart of what we do is community organizing. And so I just put some of the ways, some of the things that are what community organizing mean to us at the bottom here. We're always doing outreach to talk to more workers, learning what problems people have in their workplaces, doing worker assemblies where people come together to talk about what issues we can collectively work on together, really doing a lot of leadership development, and from all of that work providing or developing campaigns that our workers run. And so the next few slides, Cecilia is going to really delve into to talk about what that looks like in practice.
Yes. So what do we believe? We believe in deep organizing and participatory democracy. And I think Ashley already dive into like what do we see as deep organizing? And to us, I just like the only thing to add is that it really means that the folks that are directly affected by a specific problem, by a specific issue, are the ones that are the most engaged, directly engaged with the strategy, directly engaged with the implementation of a campaign. And that also like their needs, the demands, their wants are centered at the core of the campaign. Are centered at the core. Yes. So we believe in organizing whole workers or whole worker organizing. The philosophy behind whole worker organizing is, workers are people. When they come to a workplace, they don't just come with their worker hats put on their heads, right? They come with a story, they come with a community, gender identity, a social background, and a lot of different complexities that they come in and that affect their everyday life, that they're affecting the way that they do work, and as well as their communities being affected if the worker is affected as well. So because of that, we have different types of campaigns and programs that focus not just with issues regarding to the workplace or a specific industry. We also have community campaigns, such as Music City Writers United, which Ashley leads. We have a community radio station open to the community, and we use this as an organizing tool, as a language justice tool, and really just as also as a training tool, right? To just and it's just fun. We're also the founding members of the Nashville People's Budget Coalition, which is a coalition of primarily Black-led and Black-centered grassroots organizations that are trying to implement invest divest principles, right? So invest in the community and divest from oppressive systems such as the police. In terms of workplace and industry, as we mentioned, we have our commercial construction campaign. We have workplace campaigns, which come, when a group of workers want to organize inside their workplace, want to organize for better conditions. We support them through that process. And we also have our wage theft and workers' compensation programs, which are basically popular education programs where workers that have experienced wage theft or have an uncompensated injury can come in, and they can learn the different steps of the process to either gain workers' compensation or recover their wages. And that often has a public pressure component and worker-to-worker education component, since the workers, any new workers that come in, get paired with more experienced workers that have already for a great resource. Oh, thank you, Aaron. That new workers get paired with workers that have already won their campaigns, recovered their wages. Yes. So it's a tool for leadership development, primarily, which is at the core, or organizing. Who is our base? Our base are low wage and unemployed workers, primarily Latinx, Indigenous, and Black workers. They're hospitality workers, they're construction workers, food industry workers, immigrant workers, workers who ride the bus, unemployed workers, workers who have experienced wage theft, retaliation, or abuse. So now I get to talk a little bit about what I spend most of my time at Workers' Dignity, which is in the commercial construction campaign. The construction campaign, organizing the construction industry is a very strategic industry to organize, right? A strategic campaign, a strategic industry to organize is an industry that holds significant economic power within a region, right? And that at the same time, there is some type of power imbalance, right? There's a lot to gain if we win this campaign. Nashville is the most dangerous city in the South for construction workers, right? It has the more deaths and more uncompensated injuries than any other Southern city, right? The picture on the right is the picture of Gustavo Ramirez, who you might have heard about. He was a 16-year-old teen who was working at a construction project near Nissan Stadium, La Quinta Inn in Interstate Drive, and he fell from a height of 120 feet while working there. He was, not provided a harness. We don't know if he was provided any kind of training, and we also don't even know why he was at a height of 120 feet, right? At the same time that all the workers are dying, that we see more problems than in any southern city, that workers are vulnerable and experience all kinds of retaliation and wage theft and other kinds of abuse on top of having, risking their life every time that they come to work. The construction industry is one of the region's more powerful, more profitable, and it is connected to the region's power structure, right? So, for example, the governor is, made a lot of his wealth from his construction company, like the Lee Company, and many other politicians are somewhat connected to the construction industry. And I don't think I have to, go over this or mention it, but Nashville is growing very fast. It's rapidly gentrifying, and that rapid gentrification comes attached to labor exploitation. Yes. So what do we do? How do we change the conditions that workers are facing here, right? And one thing to have clear is that construction workers are not the only workers that are struggling in Tennessee, right? Tennessee has one of the most powerful chambers of commerce in the country. They run the political establishment. And what does that mean, right? That you have one of the most powerful chambers of commerce. That means that they are gonna advocate and lobby for their interests with politicians. And in fact, they've done it. They have advocated for right to work legislation. They have advocated for workers' compensation in Tennessee, which is, it's a broken system, as we might see. In Tennessee, we have at-will laws. An employer can just fire you for no reason, unless, it's due your gender, it's due your sexual orientation, your religion, and even so, it's a very tedious thing to fight in, via EEOC claim. Tennessee has also some of the worst concentration of state preemption laws. And this map here depicts it. I show this to all my new organizers and volunteers. Tennessee is right in black as having the most concentration of state laws that, the way they work here is that they really prevent city governments in Tennessee from improving worker rights through a traditional policy, right? So if Nashville wanted to raise the minimum wage, we cannot do it. If we wanna have fair hours, we cannot do it. And we cannot even establish a prevailing wage law at the local level, which means that if you are a worker working in Nashville, building a project that is paid with the tax dollars from the people in Nashville, you don't have to, you are not entitled to the fair wage according to the trade that you're doing, right? Which is disturbing. There's also no accountability. We have in the whole state, we have 34 TOSHA inspectors, which is the Tennessee Occupational Health and Safety Administration. We only have 34 health and safety inspectors for 3 million workers in Tennessee. The average fine after a worker dies at a workplace is a couple $1,000 and a little more. There's minimum consequences for bad actors as well. So no accountability and no legal protections virtually. So what makes the construction industry so dangerous, right? So this is a little simplified power map that we use in our construction community meetings, right? the pyramid, it goes from at the bottom, you have the workers, right, who are experiencing all these different kinds of abuse and wage theft and all the different conditions that I already mentioned. The way that the industry works is sort of a labor contracting chain, right? When you have multiple layers of subcontractors that separate the workers from the entity that profits the most, right? That's developers. They are not exploiting workers directly, right? But they do benefit from the exploitation, and they basically create the conditions that allow the abuse to happen by going for the cheapest contract every time when they have a contracting bid, right? So they say, we want to do a project, different companies, different general contractors, which are basically nowadays just companies that are in charge of hiring other contractors. It used to not be the case, but now it is the case that way. And they give different alternatives of budgets, right? And usually the standards that the developers choose in order to give the contract to a specific company is just who does it cheaper, which usually means who is going to sacrifice the health, safety, and financial stability of the workers. They also have the power to change things, right? So even if the developers have great intentions, but they don't do anything, they do have the power to change things, right? They do. If there were someone that could give us all the different protections that workers want, it is them. So how does that look like? All those different layers of separations, right? So that looks like developers and general contractors, which are at the top of the pyramid. They just wash their hands, right? They just say, like, we were not aware that the teen was hired by a subcontractor. Like this is one of the contractors involved in the Gustavo Ramirez case, the 16-year-old that died working at La Quinta. Many people, the different companies involved in the project were just saying, like, well, we didn't even know that Gustavo was working on our site. And using that sad excuse is how they have been so far absolving of any significant consequence from having a 16-year-old fall without a harness. And of course, on the other example, it's a very, very popular campaign that we have going on, which, Molly is involved, where, one of our members, Armando, has been claiming $43,000 for building a local public school, and still to this day has not seen that money because the contractor involved is just able to wash its hands that way. So how do we fix this problem, given the fact that the political landscape is so hostile for workers, and that there's no accountability? So we're looking at an example that is in agriculture in Florida. Many of you might be familiar with this. We're trying to implement the worker-driven social responsibility, which was first implemented by the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Immokalee, Florida. So this model has three essential components, right? So first, the workers need to define how they want to work and live, because they never get a chance to do that, especially not in a place like Nashville. Second, we need to make sure that what the workers decide in terms of standards are enforced through legally binding agreements with top market players. So, right, so who owns the project, right? That could be a company like Amazon or like Facebook or like Vanderbilt, right? A private entity that owns a major development. Or it could be also, Metro or the public school system, because they're also owners of specific projects. They're just public entities. Then with every agreement of high standards has to come a clause for enforcement, monitoring, and worker-to-worker education, in order for those standards to actually, we have some type of independent monitoring involved. We have some type of mechanisms for workers to know from other workers what standards they are entitled to. And we need avenues for workers to actually, report any violations without the pressure or presence of a supervisor. Workers keep each other safe. So for that, the first component for this campaign to happen, right? This is how it will look like in the construction industry in Nashville. And we have a partnership with the WSR network and with Tool, which is a worker center in Minneapolis, Minnesota, looking at how to implement it in construction. So currently in our construction committee, we have over 30 worker leaders and their families. They are working right now on defining what standards, how do they want to work and how do they want to live, right? The committee meets every 2 weeks. They come in with their whole families, and they are preparing to choose targets based on power structure analysis and based on opportunity. And they are planning to implement public pressure campaigns against a specific developer target. There was also, due to the need that the same member leaders expressed, we now have 2 different working groups within the bigger committee, which is the Health and Safety Working Group and the Women and Non-Binary Working Group. And these are just some of the pictures that, one of them is a picture of one of our Sunday meetings. Other ones are different actions that the committee has engaged to, such as, the MNPA's wage theft campaign. And another one is, we can see Armando right there, right after our action to push Tosha to do something about Gustavo Ramirez's case. And, we actually got, thanks to the public pressure that our committee placed on state representatives, we were able to get one of the highest fines that Tosha has ever given, and as well as having different, politicians and decision makers start working groups to develop policy to improve working conditions. And this is just some examples of actual headshots, because the other ones were mostly like in a group. Recent, just this quote is just to exemplify that, MNPS, the school system, it also is a developer in itself. And, when we think about developers, we should also be thinking of public entities that are hiring many of the same unethical contractors that are just letting 16-year-olds die in their projects. BF Chase, for example, the project manager at Gustavo's project, is a major contractor in the public school system. And so is the contractor that was managing the project, where one of our members claims that he did not get paid for it. And our workers' compensation clinic. Okay.
Okay. The last 2 slides right here, we have some specific ways that people can support this work and get involved. And we really believe that there is a space for everybody in this movement if you want to help us build worker power in Nashville. And so, oops, let me see. So there are a few categories that we're going to walk through here. And these are really some of our highest need areas in the organization. And so we talk a lot about language justice, which just, simply means the right and the ability to participate in meetings and movement work in a language that you prefer. So in the language that you best understand and can best communicate in. And so many of our members speak English and Spanish, as well as Indigenous languages as well. And so we're always looking for bilingual volunteers that can help with interpretation or translation of written materials so that we can best communicate our message across the organization, and so that we can communicate our message from our members to supporters in the community. So we send weekly requests out for things that volunteers can help us translate, or in-person interpretation. And so we are always looking for more bilingual volunteers, or if you know people who are bilingual that want to support this work, that's always a high need area. Solidarity and rapid response roles. This is how I got involved in Workers' Dignity. So some of the things that go in here are like providing childcare. And so if we are really organizing whole workers, like Cecilia said, that means knowing that workers have families and are caregivers and have the need to be able to bring children to meetings, to be able to participate. And so volunteers that can help care for young people in our meetings. And this can also include like developing activities for kids. So how do we talk about our movement work with young people and children that are around the center as well? So this can also mean like helping create activities and games and things. Other rapid response roles are things like ride shares. And so for example, we help workers navigate the workers' compensation process. And so that means workers are injured and often might not be able to drive. People might not have driver's licenses. And you probably know that public transportation in Nashville is terrible. And so those are just some of the reasons why we're establishing a rideshare program. Volunteers can always help to provide rides or help coordinate that system. Other sort of solidarity roles could include things like court accompaniment, accompanying somebody to a medical appointment, or just all the other types of community defense. So we've seen like increased ICE presence and targeting people in their homes. And so just having a network that we can rely on of allies for those needs when they arise. Becoming a worker advocate. So these are for some of our wage theft and our worker compensation campaigns. And so Molly can speak a lot to this in the Q&A as well, what her experience has been like. But these are support roles that are following the lead of the worker. And so again, we really emphasize that everybody that has a wage theft fight or workers' compensation fight, the worker is the one that determines what steps are made and how that campaign looks. And advocates are there to support the worker in carrying out those decisions. So being on an advocate team could include helping do research for a certain campaign, helping do communications, accompanying a worker on the steps that they take, and really just knowing that your role there is to help actualize the campaign that the workers are determining themselves. Our next category here, communications and digital outreach. So this could be things like helping grow our social media presence, helping us draft email blasts, helping us think where we can disseminate those things so that we can constantly be reaching more people, and communications that are specific to our campaigns as well as the organization as a whole. We have an ally outreach and fundraising committee. So this is related a little bit to the communications, but a lot of our allies help with fundraising efforts. This is also a space where I got oriented to the organization. And so people on this committee help us with things like phone banking, help us with things like having one-on-one conversations with donors, and helping us just raise money through our grassroots fundraising campaign, which leads me to the next part. If you don't have a lot of time, but you have a little bit extra money, we are a grassroots funded organization. And so 30% of our budget every year comes from grassroots donors. So those are small donors, people who give less than $200 a year. We typically have 600 to 800 donors every calendar year. And so it's also important to say that our members pay $5 a month in dues to be part of this organization. And so we often ask that our volunteers make a similar financial contribution. When we are able to have our weekly wage theft meetings in person, which we're not doing right now, of course, we would pass the piggy bank around every night. And so we really have that culture of knowing that we are funding our own movement by throwing in whatever few dollars we can a week or a month to really build the power that we need through grassroots donations as well. And so we always very graciously accept donations if you can support this work. And that's really what we have prepared for you here. We would love to talk more, answer questions, and these are just some resources that we wanted to end with. So you can sign up for our email listserv at our website, which is just workersdignity.org. We don't send more than probably 3 to 6 emails in a month, so we don't spam you with emails that you don't want. You can sign up to volunteer. This is our volunteer form, join Workers Dignity at that bit.ly link. We are having a volunteer orientation on November 10th, which is next week. And again, if you are in a position that you're able to support this work with a donation, you can do that at that bit.ly donate to Workers Dignity link as well.